Game over when time's up. In the world of game development, particularly for puzzle games like Tic Tac Toe, the challenge often lies not just in the basic mechanics but in adding features that elevate the user experience. One such feature that can make your Tic Tac Toe game stand out is a time limit for each player's turn. This feature adds a sense of urgency, ensuring the game doesn't drag on and making it more competitive. Implementing a game over when time's up mechanic in a Flutter-based tic-tac-toe game requires understanding several components: setting a timer, monitoring the time, enforcing game logic when time runs out, and offering user feedback. To begin, the core idea behind setting a timer for each player is simple. Each player is allowed a certain amount of time to make their move. If they fail to do so within the time limit, the game automatically ends, or alternatively, the turn could shift to the other player. The time limit can be as short as a few seconds or can extend to a minute, depending on how fast-paced you want the game to be. This mechanic also ensures that no player can exploit the game by taking too long to make decisions, keeping the game moving at a reasonable pace. In Flutter, you can utilize the timer class from Dart's Dart Async library to create a countdown timer. The basic functionality involves starting the timer when it's a player's turn, monitoring the countdown, and updating the user interface to show the remaining time. If the timer reaches 0 before the player makes a move, the game needs to respond accordingly. The challenge comes in how to integrate this timer with the existing game logic. First, you'll need to add a time limit that is associated with each player's turn. This could involve initializing a timer when the game starts, ensuring that the timer resets each time the turn switches between players. You would likely implement a visual countdown timer that updates dynamically on the screen, providing feedback to the players so they can track their time. A stateful widget would be ideal for this, as it allows you to update the countdown as the timer progresses. The next part is ensuring that the game knows what to do when the timer runs out. There are several options here, depending on the rules you want to enforce. One approach is to automatically skip the current player's turn and pass it to the next player when the time expires. Another approach might be to automatically declare the game over if neither player has made a move within the time limit. You could also choose to give the player a slight grace period to make their move before transitioning to the next phase of the game. User feedback is crucial in making sure players understand what's happening when the timer runs out. At the moment the timer ends, the game should immediately display a message to the player or show a pop-up indicating that the time has expired and the game has either ended or moved to the next player. For example, you could use Flutter's Show Dialog method to display a simple dialog box informing the player that their time is up. To ensure that the user is aware of the time limits, you can add a visual cue like a red background or flashing timer as a countdown reaches the final seconds, creating a sense of tension as the timer ticks down. In terms of the backend logic, this feature may seem relatively simple at first, but it requires careful attention to the state of the game. You need to account for scenarios like pausing or restarting the timer, handling edge cases, such as what happens if the player disconnects or loses network connectivity, and ensuring that the game accurately reflects changes in the timer state. For example, if the game has a networked multiplayer mode, you need to ensure that the timer runs consistently across all devices and that the game accurately synchronizes when time runs out for one player. Flutter offers several useful packages that can help you integrate time-related functionality, such as Flutter_timer or Flutter_countdown_timer. These packages make it easier to handle time-based events without having to write the entire timer logic yourself. However, you'll still need to integrate them with the rest of your game's state management and ensure the user interface reflects the ongoing countdown. In multiplayer games, especially when time limits are in place, it's important to ensure that the experience is fair for both players. For example, if a player takes too long to make their move, the game shouldn't punish them by cutting off their turn too early. Instead, you can introduce a small grace period or allow the player to restart the timer once per game, giving them a chance to recover if they were distracted or facing a momentary issue. Another aspect to consider is scalability. While this feature works for a simple, two-player tic-tac-toe game, you might want to extend the concept of time-based mechanics to other multiplayer formats or game types. For example, you could consider having different time limits for different game modes or player skill levels. More advanced settings might allow players to customize the time limit per round or add options for overtime, where each player gets an additional fixed amount of time if the game reaches a draw or tie after all rounds. Add comment to easily understand code. Commenting your code effectively is one of the most valuable practices in software development. It helps not only yourself but also others who might be working with you or reviewing your work in the future. In the case of a tic-tac-toe game built with Flutter, proper code commenting becomes even more important. As your code grows in complexity, adding clear and concise comments makes it easier to navigate, debug, and enhance the game. This section will explain how to implement comments in a Flutter-based tic-tac-toe project, ensuring that your code is not just functional but also easy to understand. The first rule of good commenting is that it should be useful. Comments shouldn't simply restate what the code is doing. Instead, they should explain the why behind the code, giving context for decisions made during development. For example, when you're implementing the timer functionality discussed in the previous section, you might write a comment explaining why you chose a certain time limit for each player's turn or why you're using a specific approach to update the UI based on the timer state. Another important aspect is to comment on sections of code that are complex or non-intuitive. For instance, if you're working with advanced state management, such as using provider, riverpod, or block, comments should explain how the state is being passed and updated. This is crucial in Flutter, where the widget tree and state management can become convoluted, especially when handling dynamic updates like those triggered by the timer.